client deal with it the same way that they did. And the person, I think you're always in trouble doing clinical work when you start relying on your own personal wisdom rather than on the clinical techniques. And you can see this happen with people working with like young troubled youth or younger adults or whatever. In some ways, I think young people can be at an advantage because you know that you haven't been old yet. So you sort of have to use the skills and the knowledge and kind of stick to doing the therapy rather than trying to draw on your own wisdom as an older person. But I have seen some peer counseling programs that work really well, where they have ongoing supervision and good training. I've seen some older therapists who are just great with older adults, but I don't think it gives you any automatic leg up on it. Nor do I think that being young is a handicap. Although if you're at all anxious about being a young person working with older adults, your older clients will find a way to use that against you. And you have to learn you have to get inoculated against that. Deal with your anxiety somewhere else. Which is always a good idea when you're a therapist.
Yeah,
really. Anything else you want to know about therapy before we move on? If you're intrigued with this kind of stuff, much more about it in 522 and counseling older adults and their families, just as there's much more about what you've already heard about psychopathology and some things that you haven't heard yet about psychopathology in the 522 class. If not, that's okay too. Let's take that 10-minute break. We'll come back and talk some mental health stuff.
Even young, I was not
Let's talk about health psych and we can wrap up a bit. So, from a knowledge-based, kind of science-based aspect, health psych tends to focus on the relationship of psychological variables to health outcomes. So the classic things go back to like the type A personality metric, which almost everybody gets wrong. How stress relates to physical disease, health outcomes, and so forth. There generally is a theme of a focus on the appraisal of stress being more important than the objective stress, although looking at objective stress is also a theme running through the literature. But this is the idea that with very few exceptions, there aren't that many things that actually everybody experiences as stressful, but that in fact some people will view something as a challenge or as a growth experience, and other people will find it sort of overwhelming and stressful. So we're talking some about grief before the break, and one of the things that I found surprising and a little bit concerning, thinking about my future as a married guy, was the number of widows who actually find widowhood to be sort of a relief.
It's true.
You see them 1 week before their husband dies. They come in a month after the death. Not everybody, but it does.
Talking about with caregivers specifically? Cause
No.
They got a pretty strong response.
Getting their face done, going on a cruise, joining social groups.
I read a paper on caregivers and how, like, afterwards, because they don't have the stress in their life anymore, some people bounce back so drastically that they go from really depressed to happy pretty quick. Interesting to know it's not just caregivers.
Some people just live with men. It's really married.
Some people stay pretty distressed from it.
Yeah.
Talk about the widowhood effect too, right? I mean, people, have you ever read some studies showing some people die shortly after?
Go back and look at that stuff, not so much. Everybody believes that, and the empirical basis for that belief is has always been a little controversial statistically, and everybody can come up with an anecdotal example. It's not universal, and sometimes it's probably part of what it's associated with is often the other person is also sick. And with very traditional, this will probably start disappearing in the cohorts we have now and beyond. I think with some of the very traditional cohorts from a few decades ago, one of the things that happened was that some of the men didn't know how to cook and make their own food. They started. I've known guys who didn't know how to do anything except go to the colonels after their wife died. Like one of the big adjustment issues. I think Sam.
Oh no, I was gonna ask. It's not a trend with widowers, just with widows to get
To party.
Yeah, because men usually get remarried like wiki.
I was just saying, the issue with the widowers is studying singles.
Yes, sir.
I've known guys that
I know.
really didn't want to start socializing again, that were complaining about how they couldn't like go places without the women all closing up. It's just, I knew guys that said like the night of their wife's funeral, women were like popping up at their door with pies and cakes and making it clear that they were willing to spend the night.
Funny.
I had one guy who was about 6 months past the death, and he wanted to go on cruises, but he couldn't go on the group activities without all the women pursuing him. Not all the guys are reluctant. This guy just wasn't ready to deal with it. But a lot of guys just get snapped up again. Because it's partly the ratio. The ratio of men to women changes radically as you get older anyway, and then particularly if you look at single men to single women post 65, 70, and so forth, it gets really extreme.
So is the remarriage keeping them from becoming happy?
No, I mean, sometimes it leads to happiness.
Okay.
Not always.
Interesting. It's like they would be happy, but they got married again.
A lot of the stuff on, there's not a lot of good stuff on the longitudinal outcomes of widowhood, but a lot of what there is would suggest that the people who stay depressed months post the death are people who were already depressed prior to the death. And you see quite a bit of stability in depression that's actually independent of grief. There are measures of grief that are separate from measures of depressed mood, and you can see in some of the studies you can see declining trends for grief over time, but the depression level stays sort of the same. So they actually seem to be somewhat independent. I don't know if this will ever change in the diagnostic manual. I think we've loosened up a little bit in the last revision or two. I think we've actually handicapped a lot of people from getting treatment for depression by putting too much focus on thinking that depression after the death of a loved one is normative, and so it shouldn't be treated. Or well, I don't know if it shouldn't be treated. Third-party payers shouldn't have to reimburse for it because it's not real depression. So it's just normal bereavement. And I think you actually can separate the two. It's meaningful to separate. Yeah, Trish?
The stages of grief, when you compare them, like I think of what I learned in nursing school is Kubler-Ross's grief process. I think that's fairly still respected.
Sort of, kind of, yeah.
So how does the grief process differ in an older person compared to a younger person? Are some phases longer or abbreviated?
I don't know that there are any meaningful stages of grief. I think that people have overgeneralized reacting to news of your own impending death to the grief experience, which I think is a really bad idea. I don't think the two things are all that comparable. And actually part of what I meant by this sort of kind of thing with the Kubler-Ross stages of preparing for your own death is, I think what you don't ever want to do is like argue with people about whether they're going through it in the right order.